Support Name Explain on Patreon for ad-free videos, exclusive podcasts and blog posts, and to help choose what names get explained. Click the link in the description. Here at Name Explain HQ, we tend to deal with place names that are pretty exciting. That, however, cannot always be the case, I'm afraid. Not every place name on our planet has a deep history, or an exotic sound, or even just intriguing in general. Some places have names that are rather, dull, boring and bland. And when I say that, I'm not saying that these places have names that could be described as being dull, boring or bland. I'm saying that these places have names that are literally dull, boring and bland. Yep. Today we're focusing on 3 specific towns out on our planet. One is called dull, one is called boring, and one is called bland. These are incredibly mundane and mediocre sounding names. Though what's great about this is because that these names are so uninspiring, it actually makes them of extreme interest, especially for name nerds like us. So where and what exactly are these places, and how did they end up with these, well, dull, boring and bland names? Let's start with the town of Dull. Calling it a town is actually a bit too optimistic, it would seem, however. Dull is located in the home nation of Scotland in the United Kingdom, more specifically in the Perth and Kinross Council area. As mentioned, calling Dull a town might not be incredibly accurate. Even calling it a village might be a little too much of a stretch. From what I can gather online, Dull is little more than a single road with houses on either side. It did used to be much more, however. It once had an extended area with a population of over 2,000 people in the early 1950s. However, since then this population shrunk to a meager 84. However, those 84 seem to have the things they need in the village, with seemingly the village's most popular attraction being the Highland Safari and their ancient Celtic crosses. Of course, Dull is drenched in Scotland's ample natural beauty too. While this small settlement might sound a tad dull, Dull is not named after the fact that it was deemed dull by others. It's thought this name may come from Pictic roots. The Picts were an ancient Celtic people who once lived throughout Scotland, with their language being known as Pictish. The modern name of Dull is thought to come from the Pictish word of dull, meaning water meadow or possibly just meadow. As mentioned, Dull is in the midst of Scotland's nature, so it's easy to see why it was named after a meadow of some sort. Over time, this Pictish word became dull, and for the record, our modern adjective of dull doesn't relate to meadows, but is thought to come from the old Saxon word dull, meaning stupid/foolish. Boring is perhaps a bit less dull and boring than dull. Unlike Dull, Boring is not a tiny settlement in Scotland, but it's not only in a different country, it's in another continent entirely. The town of Boring makes itself at home in Clackamas County, Oregon, in the United States of America. While Boring has more than 85 residents, it still has a relatively small population of just under 8,000 people. Boring is another town with a population in decline too, as previous records have the population closer to the 12,000 mark. I wonder what's making people leave towns like Dull and Boring. Surely it can't be the name, can it? From what I can read online, Boring sounds like a wonderful slice of American culture, with things to enjoy such as corn mazes, pumpkin patches, and even an alpaca farm. The town even hosts an annual goth float, in which many goths gather and float down the Clackamas River. I promise I'm not making this up. Boring was even built on a former lava field, which is now called the Boring Lava Field. An oxymoron of a name if I ever did hear one. Boring seems to get a kick out of their town's name, however, and have played along with it, with the town's motto aptly being the most exciting place to live. A town with an abundance of alpacas and goths seems anything but boring to myself. This is because this town isn't named after being boring, but named after one William Harrison Boring. Boring was a Union soldier who first settled there in 1874. Eventually the town appeared around his farm and it was named after him. The adjective of boring we have does not relate to this town or William though, but simply comes from an adaptation of the verb/noun of bore. And finally we have Bland, or Blandshire as it's officially called. This settlement is in yet another continent all the way over in New South Wales in Australia. Bland has a population of around 60,000, so sits neatly between Dull and Boring. According to their own website, some of the more popular things to do there include exploring their wetlands and following their art trail. They are also home to Australia's biggest football, so that's something for sure. Like Boring, Bland was named after someone, another William in fact. William Bland was a transported convict from London and surgeon who grew to be an important figure in the land. So much so, this area was named after him. Once again, the name has nothing to do with how bland is. Bland as an adjective comes from the Latin blandus, which actually means smooth talking / alluring. It later transitioned into meaning mild and not stimulating. One of my favourite things about Bland is their billboard, which says, "Bland, far from dull and boring," which works on so many levels. These three towns are dull, boring and bland. While their names may not etymologically link them with their respective adjectives, we certainly have culturally made a link between these towns, their names, and the adjectives. What's great, however, is that these three towns didn't just sit idly by and watch the world point and laugh at their names. They did something about it. Luckily, the residents of dull, boring and bland all saw the humour and potential in their town's names. It was not only potential they saw, however, but also the chance to earn some money. This is something we've covered in the past. A unique name can elevate a town into so much more. These three places could so easily have just been three small towns no one had ever heard about in their respective countries, yet their names have allowed them to all break the mould and become rather well known. It even gets weirdos like me to talk about them on the internet. You don't see me talking about the village of Gatehouse near Dull now, do you? Maybe Gatehouse would have its own video if it had a more interesting name. Sorry to anyone watching from Gatehouse, by the way. Anyway, how does an odd name help a town create money? Well, one simple word. Tourists. So many little towns that tourists would never ever consider going to have used their odd names as a way to draw people in and profit. Tourists seem to really get a kick out of taking a photo next to a sign that has a bizarre name on it, whether that name is really long or short like we've looked at in the past, or just rude or funny sounding. If tourists go out of their way to visit a small town just because of its name, then they'll most likely spend money there too. Not only would they spend money on food and accommodation, but even spend money on souvenirs with the odd name on it. Who wouldn't want a t-shirt saying "I visited Boring" on it? Though there's a bit of a difference with the towns of Dull, Boring and Bland, however, in regards to how they monetize their names. Instead of each individually promoting their silly names, they actually work together. They have partnered up with one another in a few ways and formed something they officially like to dub the League of Extraordinary Names, though the three seem to be more popularly known by a different name entirely, that being the Trinity of Tedium. This Holy Trinity actually started life as a duology, however. At first, this connection was just between the Scottish town of Dull and the American town of Boring. It all started in 2012 when a woman called Elizabeth Layton from Aberfeldy nearby to Dull was on a cycling holiday across the United States of America. On her travels, she came across the town of Boring in Oregon. Not only was she tickled by this name, but it reminded her of the town of Dull near to her home in Scotland. Elizabeth Layton had a friend who actually lived in the village of Dull, Emma Birtles, and informed her of the town of Boring. Emma Birtles then got to work on setting up talks between Dull and Boring to see if they could form some sort of partnership. After talks with Steve Bates, the chairman of Boring's community planning organisation, they agreed on working together on a variety of things. It was in 2012 the two became official paired cities, mentioning one another in their respective welcoming signs. A Facebook group was even created too, called Dull and Boring, where residents of each town could talk to one another. You can even go like their Facebook page for yourself. All of this from a simple cycling holiday. Not too bad. It was in the following year of 2013, however, when things really took off, as on the 9th of August 2013, the first annual Dull and Boring Day was held. On this day, both towns celebrate their unique names and connection in a variety of ways, from live events to exclusive Dull and Boring Day merchandise. There are even bagpipes played in Boring, USA as part of the celebrations. All of this was of course to celebrate these two small towns, but was also used to help raise awareness of them to others and even bring in more tourists and their cash. Andy Cernovit, the author of Word of Mouth Marketing, said it best, saying, "It's a way to bring the communities closer together and earn some publicity for their little towns. On their own, Boring and Dull are funny town names, but by making a partnership, they made something worth talking about." As mentioned, the pairing between Dull and Boring came into being in 2012, and it would take a few more years for the news to arrive down under. It seems the mayor of Bland, Australia at the time, Neil Pockerney, heard about Dull and Boring Day in 2013 and felt that his town should join the fun too. Then in 2014, Bland was officially partnered up with Dull and Boring too, thus creating the now aptly named Trinity of of Tedium. Though, how are things faring now? Well, pretty good it seems. Dull and boring days seem to be happening annually now, still on the 9th of August, and all three of these towns seem to be benefiting financially from their silly names. I guess a true measure of this success is that I'm here talking about it now, thanks to this union of unfortunate names. Good job, dull, boring and bland. The only question I'm left asking is, will this remain a Trinity, or will other places with mediocre names ever join their ranks? Mediocre place names were suggested by James Burton, and thanks to their suggestion, they will now be honoured as Name Explain's patron saint of mediocre place names. Do you have a good idea for somewhere that's name could be covered in a Name Explain video? If so, then please consider donating on Patreon. Just $1 a month helps keep the channel running and earns you a weekly chance to suggest somewhere to be turned into a video, and you too could be a Name Explain Patreon saint. Thank you to all my patrons who support Name Explain on a monthly basis. Patreon is vital to Name Explain, and donating just $2 a month allows you to enjoy ad-free videos and bonus Patreon exclusive content. It also allows you to help choose what names get explained in upcoming videos, and gets your name here with all these awesome people. Thank you so much for all the support you guys give Name Explain. Thank you so much for reaching the end of the video. Check out another video and subscribe to stay in the loop on all things Name Explain. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram where I'm NameExplainYT, and also join the Facebook group Friends of Name Explain, both of which will be linked down below. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and once again, thank you all so much.